A sneak peek at what's coming up next.
An autistic woman replied and said, hey, word of advice, just be yourself. This guy's in his 20s. I don't know anything about him. But I said, I would like to add, when I was in my 20s, I couldn't just be myself because I didn't know who I was. If you're masking and people pleasing all the time and you say, hey, just be yourself on a date, what does that even mean? The daily affirmations.
If you have to say that to yourself in the mirror, do so. And if you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, today is the day that I'm going to like me for me, and I'm going to fit in with me for me, then do so. We make some assumptions and we automatically assume that the other fucking person thinks we're dumb and that's why they're telling us all of it. No, they're assuming they don't know if you know it or not.
People don't interact with a lot of autistic people, or when they do, they're not aware that they're interacting with autistic people, or they don't know much about autism.
Right.
So if you see somebody who's constantly dumping facts, talking about things, especially if it's a subject they know a lot about, if it's a special interest, it can come across as arrogant.
I think that ties into this because people have tendency to hear that somebody has a disorder or they're disabled or they're not as capable as somebody else in a certain area of their life. And people automatically assume that means we're saying they're lesser of a human.
Bienvenido on the Spectrum podcast.
You know, it'd be great if we actually figured out how to do that whole opening just in like Spanish.
I can do
or
it.
Something. You can?
I
can do it.
It would take me a second to think because I don't use Spanish very often.
Right.
But anyway, welcome to On the Spectrum podcast. My name is Steve.
And I'm Nick.
And I still feel like this whole opening is very corny, but I keep doing it anyway.
Yeah, well, until we get a better one.
All right,
we gotta go with it. So, as I always say, we do not presume to be experts of anything whatsoever. We're just two human beings living on the spectrum, and we've got some opinions, and we kind of give them out. We do interviews, we do topics, and today we've got a topic. But before we get on to that, I do want to say, if you're listening to this podcast and you've gotten to this point in the podcast, this point, please hit like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is. Tell a friend, tell a buddy, post it on any social media while you have. And yeah, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I was watching a video the other day and they said for a podcast you're doing, you should mention that stuff sooner than later in the podcast.
Great. Yeah. Bits of information the audience doesn't need to know. Thank you.
Yep. You know, if this was written out, you would have said that.
Now, I've called you out on it several times where you
give way too
any
much,
thought that's in your head, you feel the need to just explain it
I know.
and justify it. It's like, Nick, they don't need to know why you mentioned it right away. He's like,
I know.
I read the other day that if you put a Band-Aid on your elbow, I don't know.
Yeah, but it is
it
true.
helps
That
with
is-
psoriasis.
But that's exactly why I did it, because I felt like trying to justify to you why I was asking people to subscribe to us. And quite honestly, all of you
maybe
in
you
the
shouldn't
social
subscribe
media
to
world-
us. Maybe you should shun us and put us in a corner.
No,
I'm gonna
they
make
should
Nick wear a dunce
subscribe.
cap from now on.
No, they should subscribe, like, follow on all social media. Tell your buddies about this episode. I guess downloading is a thing too. I don't know.
Maybe if we actually get to the episode. All right, today's topic.
Yes.
It's a topic that I picked out again because
Yes.
that's the thing we do.
Yes. Yes, it is.
I want to talk about 3 things that may be confusing at first, but we'll get into it. Confidence, ego, and arrogance. And you may be asking yourself, what does that mean? Why are those 3 things? And what are those things? Like, what do you mean when you say ego? Because ego can mean different things. Confidence and arrogance can mean different things. Because we're not just going by dictionary definitions here, as I was having a conversation with Nick about earlier. Yes, the dictionary is a tool that we use to help us explain words, but words are also used in conversation in different ways. And when people say certain things, what we say and what we mean when we speak colloquially in conversation with each other is not necessarily the same as how words are written. And then obviously dictionaries and words change over time based on how words are used.
So something I want to point out with that, though, is especially with these 3 words are very subjective words. Okay. And the reason why I'm calling them that is because everybody got slight different variations of what they think they mean. And I actually think that having at least a dictionary basis or guideline to start from allows people to have a conversation about something in a far more clear way.
Well, I don't think we need a dictionary to define confidence.
Oh, I do.
And I don't think we need a dictionary to define arrogance.
Yeah, I don't think we should pull out a dictionary right now and to define them, because we're talking about them in social concepts right now.
All right,
but
so
like the word confidence, people when talking about like words like respect.
What?
Okay, when people are talking about like the word confidence or respect, or even how to show love, right? Everybody's got slight different variations of what that really means and how it's expressed. And so I think when talking about certain concepts or certain words, it is good to have a basis fundamental of what that word means to move from. By the way, there's a lot of words in the dictionary that I think are subjective only and cannot be truly defined by like a dictionary to follow by. But going on with confidence, ego, and
obviously the context of all this is we're talking about autistic people.
Yeah.
But
of course
some of the stuff we're going to talk about theoretically, because it's not like we don't have this whole thing planned out. When we do these episodes, we're going, we don't have we have like bullet points maybe we're going to talk about, but we don't have the whole conversation planned out. But a lot of these bullet points and a lot of these things will probably overlap with autistics and just people in general.
Yes.
But there's certain things that maybe impact people who are autistic in a different way.
Maybe
for
worse,
instance,
maybe less.
Yeah. So confidence.
Yeah.
When people say confidence, they typically mean being sure of yourself, maybe being able to assert yourself a little bit. There's a lot of different things we mean when we say confidence, right?
Right there is exactly what I was just talking about.
What?
Because the word is so subjective, it's really hard to pin down.
Well, it's easier to give examples of confidence than it is like, yes, I can pull up the dictionary definition of confidence, but we know there's all the associations with confidence, right?
Right.
And then
I think self-awareness is a really good version of that. If you're aware enough, and I don't mean like being humble and shit like that, but if like, I actually got asked this in a training for my job about what confidence means. And one of the things everybody said was competent, right? And I really kind of thought about that, and like, that would be you are confident in the skill that you have if you're competent in it. Right?
I wouldn't use competent at all, because you can be competent in something and not be confident.
Right. Well, that's what I was.
There's lots of people who are very good at something, but they still struggle with being confident or feeling self-assured. And I was going to say self-assurance is related to confidence in my mind, like being self-assured.
Me too.
Feeling or knowing that you're competent would be part of it. But being competent itself is not necessarily part of confidence.
That's kind of what I brought up.
It's like self-awareness.
Yeah.
Being self-aware, like, oh, I can play guitar. I'm really good at playing guitar. I'm confident in playing guitar. Versus I'm really good at guitar, but I have no confidence in it at all.
Right.
Would be, hey, I'm really good. And that kind of plays into the Dunning-Kruger thing that I talked to you before that you hate, but
yeah.
It's,
Well, by the way, I don't hate the Dunning-Kruger effect itself. It's just people misuse it sometimes and just fucking.
All right.
Whatever.
So what does arrogance mean to you?
So to me, arrogance, and I can't 100% describe this, but arrogance to me is somebody who's trying to look. It's the false front of confidence. To me, that's what arrogance are. To me, those two things are opposites from one another. And I don't know if they actually are, but that's what, to me, arrogance is. It's the opposite of confidence. It's having no self-assurance. It's having no belief in yourself. It's having no trust in what you're doing, but you're trying to make people believe you do.
I don't know if I agree with that definition. Okay. I would think that arrogance is typically is a negative connotation, and it's I don't think that it because you can be arrogant but also be able to back it up. You can be arrogant.
I don't think
so let's say you're very intelligent, you're very smart.
Sure.
But arrogant would be kind of someone who is shoving it in other people's faces, or maybe using it as a tool or a weapon to shit on other people, or to, if you let's say you're very good at guitar, to use that same example. And you're really talented and you shit on other guitar players who aren't as good as you. That would be somebody who's being arrogant.
But describe the shitting on somebody else, because if
picking apart their guitar playing, but in a very mean way.
Okay, like a purposeful attempt to hurt them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or like lifting yourself up over other people.
So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because if you know something super, super well, okay, and you see somebody making some mistakes and you point out the fact that they're making some mistakes with what they're doing, I don't think that's shitting on somebody, but somebody might perceive that as shitting on them.
Right.
And that person might feel bad.
But one, first of all, it should be solicited. Like you should get permission before you start giving people criticisms.
Oh, of course.
Two, it depends on your approach. So you can be confident and competent in something, and maybe you can help somebody with it.
Yeah.
But and this is getting into a lot of neurotypical NT bullshit, but it's your approach, how you approach the person and explain to them.
You don't think that applies to autistic people too?
Well,
approach?
It also depends on your intent as well.
Yes.
Because you might be critiquing somebody else and trying to quote unquote help them.
Yeah.
But maybe you're doing it also to make yourself feel better because, well, I'm better than them. So I'm picking apart their shit to make myself feel good.
And there might be a component to that.
So that would be arrogance to me. It's like I'm putting other people down to lift myself up.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you necessarily are bad at that thing, because I think you can also be very good at something, but also be very arrogant.
See, I guess so, because like to me, when you're confident enough in something, okay, you're also humble in it. You don't need to prove yourself anymore to anybody. But when you're arrogant, you're constantly proving yourself because you don't have the confidence behind what you're doing. Like you can be good at something and not have confidence.
But what if you're really good at guitar?
Yeah.
And you're confident and you're competent, but you're acting arrogant all the time. But it's maybe the need for approval, the need to lift yourself over other people doesn't come from your guitar playing. Maybe it comes from something else in your life.
Right. So you're lacking in confidence in maybe who you are or another piece of your existence.
But it doesn't mean you're bad at guitar. Maybe you are really good, but instead of being humble about it, you use that as a way to lift yourself above others.
Well, but that's what I mean, though. It's the confidence. You're lacking confidence somewhere else in your life, and that's what creates that arrogance in your guitar playing, because you know you're good at guitar, but you're still trying to lord it over other people because you yourself feel as if you're lesser than them anyway.
Yeah, or whatever their intention is, or whatever the reason for it is. But essentially, it's used typically in a negative way, and it's you're usually having a negative impact on other people.
Right.
All right, ego.
Ooh.
Ego, you can give me the Freudian or the colloquial version of ego.
So I would honestly say ego, and some people are going to look at ego as a bad thing, period. But I think ego is your understanding and sense of self.
I don't think it's bad or good. It's just, it is a thing.
It is, yes. I would have to say that confidence is also not necessarily a good thing, because we described it in a good way. I don't think confidence necessarily is a good thing.
People,
always.
At least
not always,
when I hear people use ego, they typically use it in a negative way, but it doesn't have to be. Because usually when I hear people saying ego, they're talking about people having their egos damaged and then acting out against other people.
Yes.
In
kind of almost in an egotistical injury. If you will.
In a lot of the context I see is, let's say, a police officer who's acting like a dick because somebody didn't do what they wanted to do, and so the cop starts trying to swing their dick around or use their authority to assert themselves on somebody, or they call it cop-splaining. Cop-splaining is like when a cop tries to come up with something to get you with because they're upset with you for something you did.
Sure.
So let's say you're walking across the street and or let's say you're being a little too loud with them and they try to say you're disturbing the peace, even though you're not actually disturbing the peace, but the cop is mad with you because you were swearing or doing something they didn't like.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to cop-splain their way into charging you with something.
Oh.
It's just the stupid term people use. But anyway, that would be a common example of ego I see people use, is talking about cops having their egos hurt and then they act out against the public instead of acting how they should behave.
Right.
They're letting their personal feelings dictate how they behave with the public, which is not what they're supposed to do.
Their pride, if you will.
Yeah.
And their pride is hurt.
Right.
And I think that plays into the ego, absolutely. But I think ego, and as you said, it's a neutral fucking word. It's not a good or bad, but it's essentially just your understanding of self. And that's kind of it. But I mean, it fluctuates. Like bringing up pride. I think a lot of the examples you're using is when somebody's pride is hurt. And a lot of the times I think that's kind of what creates that ego defense response that you're describing is somebody's pride gets fucked, and their only response is, I got to protect myself. And if we think about it, it is essentially a psychological harm. Like their mind is trying to stop them from feeling like shit.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the mind does.
It reminds me of cognitive dissonance. Like when when somebody's confronted with something that doesn't match with their thoughts or beliefs.
Right.
And then you basically have to decide whether you're going to try to be open-minded about changing your thoughts or your behavior or beliefs, or if you're going to dig your heels in and act like a fucking dick.
How come digging your heels in is automatically a dick?
Well, it's not, but typically people, typically in my experience, people don't behave well when they're confronted with things that go against. So
they generally
it's like, hey, I believe X, Y, and Z, and I point out something, a fact that goes against how you feel or believe. And a lot of times at that point, people will get defensive, or they'll name call, or they'll do something to try to discredit you or insult you because their sense of self, their sense of whatever is somehow attacked by new information.
Yep.
So, and it's not one group of people that does this. It's everybody.
No. Everybody does all three of these things. Like, you're making a very valid point, Steve. And I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, I was just pointing out because I see online when people talk about these things, a lot of times people talk about these things in the context of debate, social issues, or politics. But like the people on the left and right will accuse each other of doing this shit, but they both do it.
Yeah.
Or not both, but everybody, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, does this shit.
Well, because humans do this shit.
But it's just funny to me to see like lefties saying, oh, look at those conservatives. They're so dumb. They won't, like, they're confronted with new information and they won't believe in it.
Right.
Or same thing with the conservatives. Like, oh, I get these libtards. They won't blah, 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 blah. And it's like, they both do the same thing.
Yeah. So let now that we defined our terms, because I think we defined them well enough.
Yeah.
And this all, as we just described this applies to all human beings. We're describing this as. But as we go on to the next question, I want to make sure I was saying that. How are autistic people sometimes perceived as arrogant, know-it-alls, if you will? Think you're smarter than everybody else, that kind of thing. And why does it happen, man? Why are we perceived that way? Good.
There are many different ways to answer this question.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things is awareness. So I know we talk a lot about autism acceptance, but there's still a lot of awareness that's not there. People don't interact with a lot of autistic people, or when they do, they're not aware that they're interacting with autistic people, or they don't know much about autism.
Right.
So if you see somebody who's constantly dumping facts, talking about things, especially if it's a subject they know a lot about, if it's a special interest, it can come across as arrogant, or like you've been accused of mansplaining because you're talking about something. It's something you like or you know a lot about, and you're just sharing the information, and you feel like you have to get it out. So we say these things, but people who are not autistic, or a lot of neurotypicals, holistics, whatever you want to call them, they can interpret that as you're trying to over-explain everything to me like I'm an idiot or I don't know anything.
So that right there, you just said, like I'm an idiot. I didn't assume you're an idiot. I just kept talking, and you're the one who's assuming my intent or my thinking.
Right, because people who are not like us typically won't do those sorts of things. So when they see it, they perceive it as, why are you doing that? And the logical thing to them is, oh, you're trying to explain things to me because you think I don't know anything.
Occam's razor. Again, it comes into conflict with human beings. And I've said it in a previous episode. I kind of did my breakdown of it, so I'm not going to do the breakdown again. But it's that simplest explanation bullshit. We make some assumptions, and we automatically assume that the other fucking person thinks we're dumb, and that's why they're telling us all of it. No, they're assuming they don't know if you know it or not. But I will say, autistic people have a tendency to do that too, make that assumption. Like you said, mansplaining. That's somebody assuming that because I'm a man, I assume you as a woman are dumb. Why would you make that assumption?
I would add something to that. Why? Because mansplaining, I don't think mansplaining, at least as I understand it, is that the man is necessarily making a conscious effort to say like, oh, women are dumb, I need to explain to them. It's more of a patriarchal, unconscious thing, like which culturally men are socialized a certain way and women are socialized a certain way. It's that men have a certain level of confidence in asserting themselves and talking about certain things because of the way we're raised.
Uh-huh.
And so we have a tendency to talk over women or talk down to them, but I don't think it's always a conscious effort.
Talking down to somebody is you believing you know better.
Not necessarily, because I think people do it without realizing they're doing it.
No, I disagree in that.
I think that people can.
You have to be coming at them from a position of I know best.
I think people can consciously do it.
Okay.
People do it intentionally, but I also think people do it without realizing they're doing it because they're not putting that much thought into it. So, for instance, if I am talking to somebody at work, let's say I have a new person who's hired.
Yeah.
And I don't assume, but they're new.
Yeah.
All right. So if somebody who starts as new, something that is common and natural for people to do is they're like, oh, I don't know what this person knows because they're new, right? They might have a high level of knowledge about it.
Yeah.
Or they might have little.
Sure.
A lot of times when you have somebody new, they probably don't have a lot of experience or they don't know certain things depending on what field you're in. But they might not know, even if they know a lot about the field, they may not know about a lot about your company.
Right.
So at certain times you may be talking to them as though they don't know anything, even if you're not intentionally trying to talk down to them, but you kind of are in a way because these are just things we do as human beings. Like you're like, I don't know how much this person knows. I'm explaining things to them. And maybe you assume a little bit, this person doesn't know anything because they're new, but you don't really know if they know anything or not. So you're making some assumptions.
So one, talking down to somebody who gets to deem that you're talking down to them?
The person who is being talked to. Yeah.
But how much of their previous life and experience is now affecting their perception of how you're talking to them?
I mean,
that you had nothing to do with.
But that's true for any time anybody is slighted by anything.
But that's part of the problem I have.
You can talk about people who find
about talking down to one another.
People who feel like somebody's being sexist or racist towards them.
Yeah.
Yes, there is blatant racism and sexism.
Yeah.
But there's also times where it's a little more not innocuous, but subtle, where is the person or not? It's a gray area where this, what's the intent of the person? You don't know. But if you're somebody who has had experienced a lot of racism or things against you, you might be prone to, rather than giving the person the benefit of the doubt, you might err on the other side because of all your experience.
So I had a moment not too long, a couple months ago, and here's actually an example of this. I saw on our Instagram a group of people who I'm going to refrain from saying the name of. It's an organization. I'm going to refrain from using their name until I need to in this story to illustrate this point about it. This person I was talking to got upset because they heard me use the word sisters, and got upset because I'm white. He explained this to me after the fact. He got upset because he doesn't like hearing white people say the word sisters. Not any context. He has no context of who I am, what I am, or any experience in my life, but he doesn't like white people saying black-centric words. That's what it came down to in a later conversation. The group is called, Sisters of Children of Autistic People or something to that effect, right? Their name, that is their name, and I was telling him the name of the group. And it was all about, African-American women or black women supporting other black women who have autistic children, which great, awesome group. I mean, that's a great group to have. People need support, right? And especially in different demographics, everybody needs support and be around other people who are like themselves. It was just, that's the name of their group. Nobody could communicate who that group was without using the word sisters. Right? And
I still don't like hearing you say
it. By the way, I'm overemphasizing it on purpose.
No, but it does sound weird coming out of your mouth. But it's good.
Well, no shit. But he initially got upset because he didn't like hearing a white person say that word. But there's no way for me to communicate this interesting group that I found that it was holding an event that was online that I might have wanted to watch because of the topic, because I also have an autistic kid. But he just didn't like me saying that word. But I can't talk about that group without using their name, and that's their name. But it was his previous experience with white people that caused that reaction. That had nothing to do with me at all.
It is kind of cringe when white people will co-opt like black culture and co-opt black phrases.
Well,
and
no,
I
understand, but that's the name of the group. It's not like I was saying
I know,
you weren't talking about a couple of black girls who walked by or a couple of black women at a bar. I literally was saying it because that's their name, which I wish to God I remembered their full actual name, but it is like Sisters of Autistic Kids or something like that. Anyway, but like during the later conversation, he said, "Why didn't you just say sisters?" And I said, "Because that's not their fucking name." So I was trying to say it the way it's spelled on the fucking Instagram post. And he goes, "Oh." And then I showed him the post and he goes, "Oh, it does say sisters." And I was like, "No shit." But then we talked about stuff like he doesn't like it either for that. By the way, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because he had a misconception walking into that conversation where he heard me use that word, and it was his previous life experience. And a lot of the times people have tendency to blame the person who said it for how they feel. And because you were talking about feeling diminished, right? Talking down to me. Well, how about the person's just explaining and you need to put your ego in check?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the equation too. But I feel like...
Well, but we don't have that conversation. I don't mean we. I mean, people, especially autistic folk, do not have that conversation.
There's a lot of time... There's a lot of different... there's a lot of conversations or subject matter where culturally we only talk about one side of it.
Right. Yes.
There was an example that somebody gave the other day that I had never thought about before. I was listening to somebody on YouTube and they were talking about, like frequently we talk about like men, when we talk about relationship stuff, right? We'll talk about how men, and I don't mean this to turn into like a gender battle sex thing, but it was just something I hadn't thought about.
Yeah.
It's something, somebody pointed this out and it's something I never occurred to me. I never really thought about it. Like, oh yeah, this is true, but I never thought about it. So men will get accused of like stringing a woman along or just using her for sex and not trying to settle down with her, right? And guys do that stuff, right? They'll string women along.
There are guys who do that.
But somebody pointed out on the flip side, a version of it that a lot of women will do that we don't talk about. And I was like, I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
And it's, let's say a woman wants a relationship, and let's say the guy is clearly trying to set boundaries, like, oh, I don't want a relationship, or I don't want this, or I'm not ready. But there are women who you'll interact with who will try to find excuses to spend time with you, or try to find excuses like, oh, it's okay, like we can just hang out, we'll do X, Y, or Z. They'll try to find reasons to spend time with you and hang out with you and put themselves in close proximity with you and then downplay it. Like, oh no, it's okay. Like, I know you don't want a relationship, but then they'll try to pressure you anyway.
Okay.
Which is a similar behavior, even though it's a little bit different in the approach. But like, there are women who will try to pressure a guy into a relationship, even though he's set boundaries like, hey, I don't want this. But on the flip side, guys do it. But we don't talk about the other flip side of it, where women will do certain behaviors like that. And they'll try to pressure a man into a relationship, even though he's set boundaries.
I would say anytime somebody wants to say a certain behavior is black culture, men, women, LGBT, straight people do this, cis people, whatever it is, somebody will assign a behavior pattern or a type of behavior to a certain group. I just want to point out that every group does all of them. And human behavior is human behavior. It doesn't matter if it's autistic, doesn't matter if it's addiction behavior, it doesn't matter if this or that, whatever label you want to put on it. Human behavior is human behavior. We all do all of it to varying different degrees, and maybe the exhibition is slightly different, but
yeah, so when this guy pointed it out, I thought about it because it's actually happened to me before, where I went through a period of time where I didn't want to date at all. And I had some female friends who were trying to spend a lot of time with me. And I would say, hey, I don't want a relationship, because at the time I didn't. And they would still try to find excuses to like come over, hang out, spend time with me, and act like they were my girlfriend, even though they weren't. You know what I mean? So it's like twisting your arm, and it's like they're not respecting the boundary that I put. But typically in conversation, we more so talk about the flip side of it on the male side. We don't talk about as much on the female side.
That's true. When talking about relationships, we talk about the failure on the male side, not the other side, or the negative
like the guy
behaviors.
sets a boundary, but she crosses the boundary, but we don't talk about her crossing the boundary. We talk about the guy crossing boundaries that the woman set.
Yeah.
Whereas,
and I would say social conception of who does it more probably plays into that.
Yeah. But I hadn't even thought about it until this guy pointed it out. I'm like, oh yeah, fuck that. Like that is true.
Right.
And I hadn't thought about it because, it's part of the way that because we only talk about it from one side.
Yeah.
I typically think about it from the female side of things of like, don't be an asshole. Don't pressure a woman into sex. Don't do this. Don't do these things.
Right.
And then I don't think about, well, what are some of the behaviors that women do that are inappropriate or some of the ways that they don't respect people's boundaries? Because we don't talk about that as much.
Right. Like changing the way a guy dresses or what kind of events he goes to or who his friends are sometimes.
And by the way, that's my experience because I know there's probably some women listening who are going to say, well, I know a lot of guys who talk about that stuff all the time. I'm sure that's true. I'm just talking about from my experience. Kind of like in one of the previous episodes when I talked about my experience with, like, I haven't had a lot of experience with the boys will be boys type shit that people talk about. Right. Even though I know that happens, but I just don't have experience with it. I haven't seen it.
Right.
So, anyway.
So with the know-it-all thing, because I get accused of that on a regular basis. Right. Yeah. And one of the things about that is I don't actually talk about a hell of a lot of subjects.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that I really don't talk a wide range of topics like regularly. Right. But I get accused of thinking I'm smarter than other people and thinking I'm a know-it-all or describing me in that way because I talk about psychology a lot. And somebody actually said, because that's all you talk about and you talked about it in such great lengths. I'm like, well, because I know about it.
It's a special interest.
Yeah. And so in that regard, I'm not a know-it-all at all. It's just your ass didn't want to talk about it anymore. Or I have more knowledge in it. Not that I'm better than somebody, but I have more knowledge in a topic. And so they're like, you just want to prove you know more. No, that's the conversation we're having. And actually, it kind of lends to doing this kind of thing really well, that I do have a good size amount of knowledge about a topic. So I would say that kind of thing goes to it. But like one of your questions, one of our bullet points, right, is why does it happen? Why do we get perceived as arrogant or know-it-alls, right? I would actually have to say that part of that is because in relation to that other group, we might have more centralized knowledge in the topic we're talking about. And so they perceived, based on what they're taught as like behavioral signs of arrogance, it seems like that.
Yeah.
Even though there is no level of arrogance to us. Well, I can't say none because, human and all that jazz. So obviously,
could it also reflect some sort of insecurity about them?
Oh yeah, I think it has more to do with them when they're describing us as arrogant, or when they're describing us.
Nobody wants to think. Nobody wants to feel or think that they're unintelligent or stupid or dumb, whatever term you want to use.
But we all are about different topics.
Yeah,
I'm a moron when it comes to physics. Like seriously, I'm dumber than
controversial.
Physics.
It's not controversial, but some people will think it's controversial. Some people are not very smart about anything.
About anything.
There are people who have low IQ.
Yeah.
And,
like actual.
And no matter how you want to measure it, they're just not very... my brother is DD.
Yeah.
He has a lower IQ. He's not... He's behind. It's like developmentally.
Yeah.
Like, there's no... like it is what it is. Like, he's not at the same level as other people cognitively. Right. And no matter how hard you try, he's not going to be able to reach the same level in certain subjects as other people. Right. And it's not just certain; it's most subjects like math, science. He's just not at the same level as other people. He's always going to be behind.
Right.
But that's
so ableist.
But
truth.
That doesn't like mean he's less of a human or he's not as important. It's just, but
that's I think that ties into this because people have tendency to hear that somebody has a disorder or they're disabled or they're not as capable as somebody else in a certain area of their life. And people automatically assume that means we're saying they're lesser of a human. That is not at all what somebody is saying.
No,
like,
but
the function.
But
language,
you need to acknowledge
you
need to acknowledge the reality of it too, because he does need assistance with things.
Right.
And so if I just say, well, if he tries hard enough, he'll get it.
Yeah. Well, like I think it actually does more of
can't.
I think it does more of a disservice, this positive psychology language of everybody's capable. I think that is far more disservicing than saying function language.
Well,
because the function language does not say you're lesser of a person.
On the other
it's
side of
saying
it,
there's parts of life itself that you're not as capable of as somebody else in that area.
On the other side of it, the flip side of it, because there's gray area too. So on the one hand, we want to acknowledge that people are going to have struggles and limitations, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, I also think that people should try to push boundaries and try to so my brother, even though he is delayed and he's behind, it doesn't mean he should stop trying to learn and stop trying to improve himself and
Steve,
learn more.
It's hard.
Right.
Steve, it's so hard.
It'll be harder for him than other people.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean he shouldn't try and just give up.
Exactly right.
It doesn't mean you're just like, oh, fuck it, I'm going to be dumb the rest of my life and just like not try.
That's right.
No, you can work on it.
Absolutely. And
it may be harder for you.
Okay.
Or maybe I want to play guitar, but it's I suck at it. It's hard for me, but you're just naturally good at it. And you learn a lot faster at playing guitar than me. Doesn't mean I should just never play guitar.
Right. You should pursue it.
Well, maybe you just have a natural, for some reason, you're just
natural.
When I say natural
skills, I don't believe in natural talent.
It's not a natural skill, but based on who a person is, a lot of different factors, maybe even just the way their brain is structured, the way their brain works.
Sure.
Some people are for, I don't know what the word to use, but it's not natural, but it's some people it comes easier to them.
Right. Right.
So
they pick it up quicker.
Right. For whatever reason.
For whatever reason. And there's actually a lot of reasons why before somebody picks up a guitar, there's a lot of other skills that they've already been working on that allowed them to start playing guitar and pick it up faster than you.
Yeah. And there's also
always a lot of that.
Family history. It's not necessarily genetics.
Right.
It could be a bunch of different things, but there are people whose let's say everybody in your family's been musicians.
Right.
And so
you're probably more inclined to be a musician then.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with all of that kind of stuff. What was I going to say? One thing I think that, or at least when I hear people talk about it, I don't know if this is the actual conception that people have, but when people talk about getting good at something, I rarely hear them say getting good at it for them. They always say getting good at it. Well, you're not as good as blah. So just because something's hard for you, still do it anyway, but it doesn't mean you have to be good at it. You can just be good enough for you at it.
Well, assuming that you want to invest the time to do it.
Right. And that's the other part
do you care enough about getting good at guitar? I know we keep using guitar as an example, but if you're playing guitar,
it's a good one to use.
Let's say I'm trying and I struggle with it. I have to decide, is it worth it for me? Because I'm going to struggle at doing this. Do I care enough about getting good at guitar? What's my goal? What's the purpose of me learning?
What's my goal? Right there. That's what I was trying to say. What's my goal?
Do I want to get good at playing guitar because I want to play a song for my girlfriend or my wife or my husband?
Right.
Or do I want to go eventually be able to play shows at a local bar or something? Or do I want to just play because I want to putz around and have fun?
I want to put this in
and then is it worth it for the amount of time I have to invest? Because maybe there's another skill that you pick up on much easier. It's you're progressing much faster, and maybe I spend my time there because I can make more gains in there.
I want to put this in context of higher support needs folks, and the reason why I want to do that is because there is people I've heard who are special educators and who are supposedly advocates for high support needs people who talk about how we're trying to push them and being very ableist by trying to push somebody to learn and do more than they're already doing. Right. I just kind of want to point out that humans actually don't do well unless they're being nudged. I don't want to use the word push in this regard, challenged, but I don't necessarily want to say it that way because then somebody comes back and says, well, how far do we challenge them? How far do we push them? And that's the nuance and the gray area of it, right? And the other part to this I wanted to bring up was level ones. There are level ones who say, I can't X. I'm not going to assign what X is. They say, I just can't do it, period. I tried once, it didn't work. I can't do it. And you're talking about investment of time. I would actually argue that if you tried something once and it didn't work for you, you need to look at, and I'm not saying you didn't, but need to look at how did you try to do it? Because in my experience, and I'm only going to speak on my experience, not shit I've read but just in my experience, most people do not actually try hard. They try something, but they give a little bit of effort to it.
I want to throw a bone here to other ADHD people.
Yeah.
Because it's a common thing or a common meme among ADHDers is that if we try something and we're not instantly good at it, then we just give up.
Yeah, but most humans are like that, honestly. Yeah. Most humans are like that. They dabble, and if they're not getting any success in dabbling,
because it's hard to stay motivated if you're not seeing improvement.
Well, you're right.
And it's hard to measure the improvement if it's small.
So like in guitar, because I play guitar, right? I have not progressed or done better or learned more in guitar in years.
But you also don't invest much time into it.
There you go. But I also...
If you played every day for 10 minutes, even 10 minutes a day would help you.
No, because you're only going to get to a certain point and plateau. Here's why I said, hold on. Hear me out before you nitpick the shit out of that. And I'd like you to nitpick the shit out of it. Here's what I'll say. You can do any skill on your own by just doing. You can do that and get to a certain point of being good at it. But to make any more progress, you actually have to now have somebody or invest more time in the learning and critiquing of it. I think there is just rote doing something, I think will only get you so far. I think you actually have to spend time and energy into being graded on it, learning from somebody who knows better than you, who can help you refine what you're doing. Or maybe it's reading the right book, getting the right knowledge in something and trying to apply the new stuff to it. I honestly believe, because I used to think, 10,000 hour rule, do something for 10,000 hours, you'll master it. But there's more to it than that. Because even like guitar, if you learn 4 chords and play those 4 chords 10 billion years, you're only going to be good at those 4 chords. You're not going to learn all the other chords. You're not going to learn how to play lead and bend the strings and all the other music theory stuff.
No, I'm not saying practice the same things every day. I just mean let's say you're playing different songs. All right, this week I'm going to focus on learning this chord, and then every day you practice trying to play that chord for 10 minutes. I think you'll see improvement throughout the week or, as you progress until you master that chord and move on to something else.
Right. But that's what I'm talking about.
Or you pick a song that has chords in it that you don't know or something and try to learn it.
But all you said was do it 10 minutes a day.
Yeah, I mean, you might need a little bit more thought, but it doesn't mean that you need to think about it for hours, but putting even a little bit of planning, like, hey, I want to play this song and I don't know how to play it. I'm going to start learning the beginning of the song. All right, next day, I'm going to play that beginning again until you get that beginning down. Perfect. Then you move on to the next part of the song.
So I think identifying steps of goals and what you're going to identify as success and progress. I think that's very important.
Well, I want to get back on topic here. So as far as the arrogance go, I wanted to talk about the impact that it has, because this is the whole reason why I wanted to talk about this subject. So we're just getting into it now. But I felt like I wanted to talk about all the prerequisite stuff first. What I really wanted to get into was the impact on our I know you hate this term as well, self-esteem. Whatever.
I do.
Get over it. Because there's not a better term that I can use. But how we feel about ourselves and our confidence is impacted, or self-esteem.
Yeah. How about self-acceptance?
Whatever.
Okay.
You and your fucking...
Just go with self-esteem.
Ellis, whatever his name is.
Yeah, Albert Ellis. The book is called The Myth of Self-Esteem. Yeah.
That's all impacted by these, excuse me, these instances of people shutting us down or treating us a certain way because we're being perceived as a know-it-all, smart-ass, arrogant. I used to get smart-ass all the time. That was what people would call me. They called me smart-ass.
That was mostly my mom telling me that.
By
the way, I do love her.
So you get called these things all the time, or you get treated a certain way because you're info dumping or sharing facts, information. Sure. And at some point, a lot of us start to shut down or collapse in. We go inward, right? We keep things to ourselves.
We internalize.
We internalize a lot of it. And it may also impact how we feel about ourselves because people are constantly telling us there's something wrong with us or the way we're behaving.
Right. And because we also thrive off of other people's approval.
So that's kind of why why I wanted to talk about this, because of the impact on how we feel about ourselves. Right. And there's another part to that, but you can talk about this first because I think the next part of my next bullet point ties into this, which is because I feel like a lot of us, one of the reasons I thought about this, there's an autistic page on Facebook. It's actually a joke group. Like it's an autism page that focuses on memes and comedy.
Yes.
But this guy's been posting stuff about dating. I don't know why, but he posted like, hey, I got a date.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like one of his first dates. The guy's in his 20s, never been on a date before. He met somebody in a dating site and he was supposed to meet up with them. And he posted, hey, I got my first date today, blah, 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 blah. And there was a woman, an autistic woman, replied and said, hey, word of advice, just be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought for a second, and I was like, this guy's in his 20s. I don't know anything about him.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, I would like to add that when I was in my 20s, I couldn't just be myself because I didn't know who I was.
Right.
All of my time was spent masking and people pleasing. And so
I would say that's most people in their 20s.
If you're masking and people pleasing all the time and you say, hey, just be yourself on a date, what does that even mean?
It's a very broad like thing.
Yes, you should be yourself.
That's a nuclear bomb.
That is very good. It is much easier to date if you're just being yourself unapologetically. The problem is that most younger people, autistic people or non-autistic people, don't really have a good understanding of who they are. So dating in your 20s is a mess because you're both putting on masks.
A show.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're being performative.
Right. So that was kind of got me thinking about this whole thing. And yes, the impact on your self-esteem, if you're internalizing everything and caving inward, then you're going to be less likely to show who you are or to be comfortable in approaching a partner, assuming you want to date or have a relationship. Right. It's going to be really hard for you to be that authentic you.
Right. So I just want to, that word I hate. If it's so dependent on other people's approval and other people's opinion, why is it called self-esteem?
Because it's descriptive.
But it's not you giving you esteem. You're waiting on everybody else to tell it to you.
Because self-esteem, yes, it can be impacted, but it's not necessarily, because I don't think self-esteem is not always impacted by other people. It often is, but it's not always. But self-esteem is the descriptive term that talks about how you feel about yourself.
But it's always influenced.
People do talk about that, yes, but it's not necessarily.
Anytime I ask people about their self-esteem or their concept of self-esteem, it's always about others. Hold on, I'm getting somewhere with this, by the way. I'm getting somewhere. Because what you're talking about right there, okay, when it comes to dating and stuff and being who you are, it is really hard to even know who you are if you're always, or a lot of the time, dependent on the conditional response and approval of others.
Right. Nick, we're apes.
So how do you, yes, no shit. And we're
social animals.
Yeah. By it.
So yes, other people's feelings do impact how we feel about ourselves. We all want to be accepted by the group.
Yeah. So to a degree. Yeah, no shit. I mean, like I talk to you all the time about how I never feel like I fit in anywhere and I'm never accepted by anybody.
You're the lone ape. Got it.
I hate that. I want to be accepted by others and I want to feel like I fit in finally, but I never do anywhere. And at this point, it's just a thing. But what I'm saying with this though is but there's a difference between understanding, okay, and being able to accept the opinions and criticisms and feedback of other people, the shitty attitudes people give, and having it not truly affect you, but you being aware of their opinions. I think that's important for this conversation because it does affect our masking and how we present ourselves.
There's a lot of different factors though.
Yeah. Well, there is.
It depends on the situation and the context.
Truly.
There are many contexts where how people feel about you may not affect you at all. You may not give a crap.
Right. Like when total strangers tell me I swear too much on this show.
Here's a simple example.
Yeah.
If you are an adult and let's say you work with a lot of kids, or maybe you're a parent and you have a lot of kids.
Yeah.
How a bunch of other kids think about you, you might not give a shit if the kids think you're cool or what they feel about you, right?
Right.
You might. But
you might.
There's a good chance you might not. What typically what people do care more about is their peers, right? If you're a doctor,
accepted by the in-group, I get it.
Yeah, if you're a doctor and all the other doctors think you're a fucking dumbo doctor and you're an idiot, then that might impact how you feel about yourself because the other doctors don't accept you. But what your patients think you might care about how they feel and what they think about you, but it might not matter as much as the approval from your peers, right? Just like as a parent, you don't necessarily care about the approval of your kids' friends and stuff. Like, who cares what they think? They're stupid kids.
So I actually am going to say this from personal experience. Be aware of who you're asking for that of, because you can have one group of people that you're around and they all think you're weird and need to do something different with who you are. And then you can be around another group of people and they're completely accepting of who you are. And you can be around another group of people who are like, you're a good person and all, but try not to wear a swastika on your forehead. There's a lot of different groups.
Like Charles Manson?
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't he like tattoo it on his head or something? Or carve it on his head?
I think carve. I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure carve. But what I'm saying is,
it was weird.
Different groupings of people will have different levels of feedback about what you can and cannot or should not change about you. And so be aware of that. Like and I've said this 1,000 times, and right now I'm struggling to remember it for myself because I'm going through some shit because I'm trying to unmask more in public and shit. But first and foremost, at the beginning and end of your day, the most important opinion and the only opinion that should truly matter to you is yours.
All right, Stuart Smalley.
Thank you.
Because I'm good enough and I'm smart enough.
Straight up, if you got to say that shit to you.
I know. It was just funny. If you daily affirmations.
If you have to say that to yourself in the mirror, do so. And if you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, today is the day that I'm going to like me for me and I'm going to fit in with me for me, then do so. I'm struggling to remember that on a regular basis right now just because of some struggles I'm dealing with. But that's what I generally used to feel on a regular basis is I need to check in with me and I need to be the first person and the last person in my day to like me. And if I'm more worried about my partner, my kids, my best friend, my boss, if I care more about their opinion than I care about my own opinion, there's something wrong with that equation.
Yeah.
And also be aware of who you hang out with. Because quite honestly, like, y'all know I swear a lot. Y'all know I'm not the smartest person in the damn world. I'm kind of ignorant about a lot of stuff. And I'm kind of callous about a lot of things. But he accepts me a great deal and never tells me I have to change those things, except for when we're recording a podcast. You tell me not to swear. I'm trying not to, by the way.
I didn't say don't swear, just to reduce the amount.
Yeah. He said be more aware of
because a lot of people find it off-putting.
You say a lot. We have
kind of like people with diabetes should be off-putting. I'm just kidding. That's it's a dumb joke. I'm sorry.
Anyway.
Yeah. So
impact
next
on masking and persona.
Right. So I lumped those two things together, which kind of
bothered
you at first a little bit.
It did just because they are very, very similar.
But they're not, because typically when we talk about masking, do people have masks in general? Yes, but I'm talking about autistic masking.
We wear.
I'm talking about autistic masking because the context is different when we talk about autistic people masking versus.
I don't know if it's drastically different, though. I think it's kind of the same. I think the result of the masking is different, though.
The reason for it is different.
Yes. I think so, but I think...
And a persona, to me, is more just like... Because masking isn't always intentional. It can be, but it's not always intentional. Whereas I feel like personas can also be either or.
Yeah.
But a persona... I think more often is something that you kind of intentionally put out there. It doesn't have to be. Like a lot of times our personas are just things that develop organically from being in. So let's say I'm in an art group and I paint and I have a certain version of me that exists in that art group.
Right. A crunchy hippie.
This persona that I exude that maybe I'm not doing intentionally, but it just kind of develops and forms this is my identity in the art world, my art persona. Right. But masking to me is more of a survival mechanism for autistic people or people in general. It's you're trying to just to get by and to function. And
I would say that it's a survival thing for both. It's a defense, a wall. It's a moat around a castle of self,
right?
Okay, if you will. And I think both are doing that with the intent of trying to preserve self, trying to preserve who we are, trying to preserve ourselves psychological pain from
and some of the trauma that comes about from people treating us a certain way, or maybe
Yes.
thinking we know it all, smartasses,
all the other words possible.
think we're
weirdo.
arrogant.
Yep,
it impacts how we mask and it impacts our personas,
of course.
and they change over time. But
Right.
you may lack some of that confidence
Right.
to be yourself and to speak openly like you normally would, because you're worried about how people are going to react or treat you when you're being that confident, outspoken version of yourself that's perceived as being X, Y, or Z.
And I would say, like, there are people who are throwing out like things are trauma responses a lot, and one of the things people are saying is like when you other the other group and you have so much vitriol for the other group or so much anger towards the other side of the equation, then that's a trauma response. And I would say, yes, you're not wrong, but I also think it's a mask you're putting on as well. Always being the angry loudmouth who's hyper opinionated and saying it's your fault to the other group, I'm going to put this in context of autism. When an autistic person says it's all their fault, the NTs, why do NTs have to do that shit? Oh my God, you people are causing us so much pain. And there is a level of truth to that, but there's also a mask that person is wearing to cover up the pain they're feeling. And I think that's part of masking as well. I don't think anybody argued that, but the reason why I'm pointing that out is because, like, sometimes we use that word masking to mean way too much, in my opinion, and we need to also take into account that some of this stuff is similar for all people.
Yeah. Or I pointed out in the past, in previous episodes, just about altering your behavior in healthy ways that is not necessarily masking, but it's just,
helping yourself progress. You said it earlier.
Yeah,
to progress and get
the
better.
example I use all the time is me respecting people's social boundaries or space, physical boundaries. Not entering people's bubbles.
Right.
I used to get really close to people when I was talking to them, and I didn't realize that it was socially inappropriate and also make people uncomfortable. It wasn't even that; it was more so I didn't realize I was doing it.
Yeah, you didn't know you're doing it.
People would point it out to me. I'm like, oh, so I had to make a conscious effort at first to not do it, but now I don't think about it. Right. But that's not masking to me. That's just me altering my behavior to be more socially acceptable.
That's right.
Is that ableist? I don't know. Who cares?
Yeah.
It makes other people more comfortable to be around me because I'm not fucking in their face.
Right. I've talked about the me using the mask or the front of the persona of being, irritable, agitated, angry, that kind of that mask, right, on a regular basis. And I've been trying not to as of the last couple of months. And it's causing me problems by not having that, because that's my initial response to try to protect myself, is to be irritable so you go away. Be a meanie face to you to make you go away.
But that also ties into my last bullet point.
Right. And it hurt me just as much as it probably bothered them, although I'm hoping to God people just forgot about me 2 minutes later after I pissed them off. They walked away and they were like, fuck that guy. But it hurt me in the long run. But it held a function at the time, which is obviously why I did it, and I did it habitually. But I'm trying to do something different, and I'm having a hard time reconciling who I really am now. And I know those other things were used as a way to protect myself and to cover up autism and to cover up some of the other things about me. But you're right. I'm having a hard time understanding who I am anymore. And obviously that also comes from unmasking. That comes from, the newer acceptance of identity. It also comes from, not really knowing where I fit in, and will people like me? Will I not? Like last night, me and Natalie had a conversation about that on the drive home from your play of, will she still like me? Because all the reasons why Natalie liked me and fell in love with me to begin with had something to do with that performative asshole.
It was that persona See, here's the thing is, okay, so now that I'm thinking about it a little bit.
It also fuels me on stage, by the way. I used to be much better at being a host when I was a prick.
So this part of the conversation has made me think a little bit more about the way I differentiated masking and personas.
Okay.
Because it's my understanding, at least in the psychological concept of persona, a persona would have more roots in your actual identity, whereas a mask could have nothing to do with your actual self.
Right. It's actually the outward expression of what you want.
If you're masking, it's maybe more performative, or you're altering your behavior, acting in ways that aren't maybe true to who you are on the inside. Whereas a persona, your persona can change depending on the environment you're in, but and I could be wrong about this, but I thought personas are more based or supposed to be based more on things that are more true about yourself. So
could be.
So if I act a certain way when I'm around an art group or a painting group that I'm in, if I have a persona, let's say I'm not masking, let's say this is just a persona that exists in this art group, that side of me that's coming out or developing or whatever term you want to use, that manifests itself is based on characteristics about me that are coming out through this process of connecting in this environment.
I'm going to use this language. Hopefully I'm not co-opting it to something that it doesn't apply to, but there's a thing called internal family systems. You ever heard of it?
Nope.
Okay. It was once described to me, and I have no idea if this is 100% true or if this 100% applies, but fuck it, I'm going with it. Sorry. In internal family systems, or at least the way it was described to me, all of your emotions and those aspects, those pieces of you are all vying for attention in you, okay? They're all kind of rising up and whatnot. And when you're talking about going to that art group and that a part of you is being expressed, why not those parts that tie to that? Why not now they're being given more voice, and like the more analytical side of you is being kind of quieted a bit.
Right.
Right? Does that sound about what you were saying?
Kind of, yeah. And then the persona is the version of yourself that people see when you're in that art group.
Right.
So it's not a mask you're putting on necessarily, but it's just a part of yourself that's being expressed in a particular way.
Right. Where you have the opportunity to express it.
Right. That's what I would think the difference between a masking and persona would be.
Okay. I like it.
With the way you were talking about the conversation with Natalie kind of made me think about that, starts differentiating the two a little bit better. Because I don't think that personas are always necessarily something performative or fake. I think that it's kind of something that manifests itself.
Okay.
And there could be parts of yourself that you don't know could exist because you haven't been put in a certain situation. So let's say you've never done sports, but then you get involved in an athletic team or a sports team, or you're given a coaching position. A persona, a coach Nick could form, and it's a different version of yourself. Is that masking? Is that fake? Not necessarily. I think it could just be a new way of you expressing yourself, a new version of yourself that kind of forms.
Well, I mean, you like to compartmentalize from work and home.
Yeah. So those would be different personas for me.
Yeah, from when we're doing our creative stuff, whatever avenue the creative stuff is in, when we do the creative stuff and you being at whatever job it is, regardless of what job it is, you like to have that separation, and you do behave differently in both of them.
And there's also some masking that goes on too.
Oh, yeah.
But the masking and the personas can exist at the same time. And just because I'm doing certain masking behaviors doesn't mean that all of it is masking. Some of it might be a different persona. Like work Steve is different than podcast Steve or comedy Steve. And there's masking that goes on during all of those versions of myself. But I think the different versions, the different presentations of myself are those personas.
Right. And I always had a much harder time doing exactly what you just described. Improv Steve, podcast Steve, work Steve. I had a hard time separating those because I felt as if I needed to have the asshole all the time. I needed to have that angry face all the time to stop people from harming me. You know what I mean? Emotionally, psychologically. And now I'm trying to drop it. And now I'm having a hard time on the opposite side of that, which is now I'm just being insecure and emotional everywhere I am.
The last part of it, which I didn't say out loud, but we kind of touched on, is sense of self.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you looked at it, so the bullet points that I gave Nick, we have, defining ego, arrogance, and confidence.
That you gave Nick?
Why? Well, for both of us to talk about, but
ego response. Go ahead.
Then going into like, why are we perceived this way? Why are we perceived as know-it-alls? And then how does that impact our self-esteem? How does it impact masking and personas that we have? And then finally, the final bullet point is sense of self. And this all made sense in my head. Yeah. Hope it made sense to you as to the order.
Sure.
But
once you put it up there,
the sense of self, I think sometimes it gets lost.
Before you get into that, I just want to pause real quick because I want to say something. And I thought about this while you were just talking. And actually, I was thinking about it when I was talking too, about masking and stuff. somebody who's listening to this podcast, okay, or somebody who might see a clip of this podcast, whatever, they might be saying, well, you guys are like that. I'm not. You guys were able to do that. I'm not. I would like to say for just about everything we're talking about in this podcast that almost everybody, not everybody, but most people are capable of it, whether you're autistic or you're an NT.
Capable of what? I don't know what you mean.
Understanding their mask, unmasking, being able to make progress with their life, be more aware of who they are and the things that affect them, not always blaming people outside their own head for everything, but also looking about the impact they have on themselves. All the stuff that we talked about, just about, not everybody, not fucking everybody, but most people are capable of it.
Yeah.
I would say that there are people on the spectrum who are not, but that's because of where they are on the spectrum. And I know that's going to sound like fucking hierarchy of shit. That's not how I mean it. I just mean that it's a lot easier for a level 1 to
there
have
are people on the spectrum
than a level 3. Okay.
There are people on the spectrum who really should have Xfinity.
Yes, there are. There are. I agree. Actually, fucking, they should pay for internet for people.
I was kidding. Isn't Spectrum like a cable provider out west?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it was a stupid joke.
No, I got it.
Sense of self. Yeah.
Yeah. Sense of self. I just wanted to throw that out there because there were times where it ties into this. There are times where we have conversations about stuff, and in my head, I can hear some of the things that like some of those whiny bitchy people have tendency of saying. And this time around, I just really wanted to point out that like when people say,
well, actually,
yeah, like, well, I can't do that. I am who I am, period. And I can't do anything about it. The fuck you can't. Like, there's always stuff we can do as human beings to help ourselves get better at who we are, what we are, and make our lives a little easier. Did I say your gut pain or your fibromyalgia will go away? Nope. I don't even know if it'll make it better. But what I'm saying is that there's always avenues in which we can go through. And I specifically have this image.
Or at least try.
Or at least try. Trying in itself is a good idea. But there's an image in my head of a certain TikToker, and I don't have a name for her.
Okay.
Or them. I actually don't know what their pronouns are either. But they constantly talked about how they can't leave their house because they're all in so much pain and they're always sick and all of this stuff, and they can't do anything. And every time somebody says they could do something to benefit their life or do better in their life, no, I can't because I'm bound to my bed and all of these things. Which, by the way, this person has videos where they say they can't get out of bed, and then I see them sitting on their fucking couch in some of their videos. So, but I'm not saying that those are not factors that impact this person. But there are things they can do to better their life, to make themselves feel better emotionally. And there are things that they can do. They're not just their disorders.
Yeah.
And I know some people like that, I am autistic opposed to a person with autism language. But there was a lot of disability advocates that worked really fucking hard to get that language changed to person first.
I see a lot of the conversations when it comes to terminology and words.
I'm sorry to go into that, but
and
that applies to self.
I try to stay out of it because I find a lot of it. It's not that I find it confusing. Like, I understand the arguments, but I just don't really want to get into the arguments about it. So
no, I truly don't want to either.
I find it to be
because whatever you want to call yourself, you call yourself.
I find it to be too pedantic, even for me, to saying I'm autistic versus I have autism, and some people don't want people to say I have autism. They want people to say I am autistic. And so that whole argument, to me, I get it, but I'm not going to invest any emotional energy into it because
I truly
it doesn't offend me if you want to say one or the other. I don't give a shit.
Yeah. Well, that's ultimately my opinion. Even when it comes to like level language, function language, support need language,
I cannot invest emotional energy into it.
Like y'all call yourselves whatever you want, but also
as long as you're not
on somebody else.
Yeah, if you're not insulting me or attacking me, I don't care.
Yeah, don't shit on somebody else because they choose a wording that you don't like.
Whatever. I know some people are sensitive about it. I'm not trying to diminish your feelings. It's just I personally cannot invest any emotional energy into it. And if I do say something that upsets someone else, then I apologize. But I'm not going to, at this point in my life, I am not going to invest a significant amount of energy into trying to police my speech in that way. I will try to use the terms that people prefer when it comes to autism, but I may make mistakes, and I'm not going to be perfect. I can't.
You just said a key part to that, what they prefer, not what some group of the autistic community feels that the entire autistic community should do. Because if somebody wants to call themselves, and if you hate this comment, please, everybody, yell at me, not him. But if somebody still wants to call themselves Asperger, I have no problem calling them that, because that's what they want to call themselves. So when somebody calls themselves Asperger and you're one of the autistic people who goes on and goes, well, we don't use that term anymore, you ain't speaking for that person or for me. And we're also part of the autistic community. So check yourself, because a person gets to identify themselves whatever way they fucking want. And I know I'm actually swearing more at the end of this episode than the beginning. It's just, I'm getting a little, because this is important to me, because there's so many people on Facebook and other social media who are putting down people and telling other people how they can call themselves because their group of people in the autistic community have decided not to use Asperger anymore. Well, I'm sorry, but there are millions of people who still call themselves Asperger. There are tons of groups you can find on Facebook who identify that way, who are in those groups being a community together, and they're part of the autistic community.
I will say a lot of those, of groups that are that were focused on Aspies or Asperger's have changed their names or updated them.
Some of them have, but there are still some
instead
that exist
of like
that way.
The National Asperger Society, it'll be like National Autism. They've changed the name. So
you're talking about global.
That was one of them, but there's other ones. Yeah, there's other ones.
I mean, there are Facebook groups that did change it when enough people said, hey, the autistic community doesn't use it anymore. And I understand it changed in the DSM, and it's not just because of the Association for Nazis. I wish to God people would remember, like, they even said straight out one of the main reasons why it's not in there, and had nothing to do with, well, mostly didn't have anything to do with Nazis. But I just don't like that people are trying to dictate how somebody else feels comfortable when it's not fucking hurting them and it's not hurting our community.
Would you correct somebody if they said, I have ADD?
No.
If they were diagnosed with ADD?
Because you just told me how you identify.
Or what if I said I was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder when I was in high school?
So I have corrected you on that, but I was wrong to do that.
No, I'm just saying that that's what I was given. It's not called that. In fact, my doctor was probably using an old term at the time, because I don't even think it was called that at the time. But it wasn't at all. In the early 2000s and even in the 90s, it still wasn't called manic depression anymore. But I used to correct people on that, and I was wrong to do it. I corrected you on it once. I was wrong to do that. You identified as manic depressive. I should have just used your language. Yeah.
I also have a problem with it because I also read just this morning, somebody said I am high function autistic. And somebody immediately said, you're demeaning and dehumanizing other autistic people by calling yourself that. And no, they fucking aren't. That's how they feel comfortable identifying themselves. So fucking let them. They obviously are not using it to demean or diminish anybody else in the spectrum. So shut the fuck up and let them identify that way. I just thought, like, you're going a bit far in this policing thing. Anyway, I'm sorry.
I understand why people don't like the function language stuff, but
I still don't fucking get it. But anyway, I also understand how it was originally used.
We're running out of time, but before we do, if you wanted to say more. So basically the train of thought with this whole conversation was the conception of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And how that plays into the concepts of confidence, ego, and arrogance. Yeah. How people perceive us, how the personas that we have, the versions of ourselves we put out there, and even the way we mask is changed, altered, and our visions of ourselves are destroyed through trauma and the way people treat us and respond to the way we behave.
Yep.
And then at the end, which is why I put this at the bottom, is like rebuilding your sense of self after going through all this.
Yeah.
That was my train of thought.
And I'm working on rebuilding my sense of self.
So I'm
working on it right now.
It's difficult. And I think even if you're not autistic, I think everybody struggles with sense of self, because what does that even mean?
Exactly. I mean, you could follow Maslow or however you pronounce the dude's name. You could follow his hierarchy of self-actualization and all that bullshit. You could follow that, or you could do the Buddhist belief or the Taoist version. I don't think anybody can truly define what sense of self is.
Yeah.
I think it means something different for each of us.
And maybe you're a different person at any given moment.
And you could be. No, I actually believe very strongly that people develop a different sense of self along their lifespan.
You can
multiple
go a
different
little
versions of it.
You can go a little bit more philosophical on this and say like maybe we're just slaves to the chemical interactions in our bodies, like all the hormones. And why do you feel certain things? Why do you feel hungry? Why do you feel angry? Why do you feel sad? Well, there's chemical interactions, there's hormones and stuff going on in our body that cause us to feel certain things.
It's all this biology.
There's serotonin and all these and adrenaline and all these things that cause us to feel certain things. So are we just a slave to the chemical interactions in our body?
But what if that's all we are? Not slaves to it, because
what I mean is that
wording, but
what I mean by slave is we have the conscious self, like the mind, the brain in the bottle, whatever. We have this thing going on here, right? And we have the illusion of self-control. We have this illusion that we actually have control over ourselves and our surroundings. But the reality is that we're also not as much in control as we think we are, because we're also dependent upon all the chemical interactions and things happening to us.
But what if?
That's what I mean.
I'm just throwing this out there, and maybe y'all can give us some comment or opinion on this too. What if there is no consciousness? What if everything is just a biology and none of the other crap that we assign to it or egotistically believe in as being human and higher up than other animals and shit? What if none of that is true? What if none of that actually exists?
And we know that some animals are... Okay, so I got to be careful the way I say this. We know that some animals have some level of self-awareness. Not the same level as humans necessarily, but we do know that other animals have some level of consciousness.
Or what if it's just the chemicals going off in a certain way that makes it look like that? What if all the conversation me and you have had over the last hour is just a series of different chemicals popping off at a certain way, and there's really no actual mind in all of that? There's no actual consciousness in all of it. It's just a series
that sounds
of
like you're getting
shit.
into more of a metaphysical and maybe a spiritual conversation at that point.
Well, I mean, you brought it into the philosophical of it. It's just... I
think therefore
believe the mind exists and all that shit. Yeah, I actually believe in that part. I'm just posing this because it's this idea of sense of self.
Yeah.
Yes, we have these chemicals in our body and this biology that is affecting how we feel, think, and react to the world around us. But what if that's all it is? All of this. What if all of this is? Like,
well, it explains a lot of our shitty behavior.
That is very much so.
I mean, human beings in general.
Yeah.
I mean, we still mass murder each other. We still enslave each other. We still treat each other like garbage. We still have wage slavery. We still have.
I'm sorry.
Wage slaves like Chinese sweatshops and stuff where people get paid not even enough to survive.
Let's not get into it. It's use of the word slave. You can't be a slave if you're being paid.
Okay, let me ask you this question, because that sounds like
we're going to get into this.
That sounds like a distinction without a difference, Nick.
What do you mean?
Yes, technically a slave is somebody who's paid, who's not paid. Well, I mean, even slaves were. I mean, if they technically, like the slaves who built the pyramids, were paid in food, right? They're given food and shelter, and most slaves were paid in food and shelter, but they're not paid like a wage, right?
Right.
Wage slavery, like the people who are basically forced to work. They're not allowed to like leave these factories.
Yeah.
And a lot of them will sleep in these factories. And so they're not paid enough to survive. So they're essentially slaves.
That's just slave.
They're essentially slaves, even though they're technically paid.
No,
but they're not.
That's just
like, what's
slavery.
the difference at that point? You know what I mean? Like you're basically a slave.
But I've heard people say in the United States, some companies pay wages.
I'm not talking about the U.S. I was talking about like China.
Yeah, I know. But the way you just described that, they can't leave the factory. They have to sleep there. They're bound to this building. That's fucking slavery. Yeah. That's not wage slavery. That's just slavery.
Right. Well, to go back to my point, I'm saying that if we are chemically dependent, biological beings, it would explain a lot of the shitty behavior that we have to each other, because,
really?
On one hand, it takes away a little bit of the responsibility because, well, I'm just acting on my the firing synapses and the chemical interactions in my body.
Right.
But we treat each other in a lot of different ways because of the way our brain and our biology work.
Right.
And we're shitty to each other.
We also treat people in good ways because of it too.
Like a lot of the prejudice and bias is based on survival mechanisms, or what we believe to be survival mechanisms of the brain of categorizing things and like tribalism and that type of stuff. So yeah, it's based in a biological need to survive, just like animals form little social groups. Chimps have little social groups and they fight with other social groups. Hey, you came into my territory, I'm going to beat you up, right? Like, okay. So we're shitty to each other.
Yes.
Well, we should try to be better.
But we're also wonderful because all of the, as horrible as possible humans have been, is also the same capacity for love. And people have shown that. And so all of that biology that's guiding all the shitty is also guiding all the good.
Yeah.
And so what if we are just the biology itself and there's no other thing? Does that take responsibility away? Not exactly, because we know full well that there's like I said, I do believe in the mind and I do believe that we are able to make choice for ourselves. But I was just posing that.
Well, Nick, you're a bunch of your brain, and you're a bunch of firing synapses.
I am.
You're a bunch of hormones and chemicals. You're also about 70% microplastics now. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also do believe in consciousness. I do believe that we are able to guide and manipulate those chemicals as well. I do actually believe
before we wrap up, I just wanted to say that my 100% patented autism cure also helps remove nanoplastics from the body, which is one of the leading causes of autism is the nanoplastics. So if you want to filter out the nanoplastics, you can add in, along with the autism cure, we now have our double charcoal water filter. You can filter all the chemicals out of the tap water that make the frogs gay and remove the microplastics and the nanoplastics at the same time. Check it out on the On the Spectrum Pod merch store.
Yeah. And due to the fact that we are recording this on the first day of the month of Pride Month, happy Pride Month to anybody. We not only are we supporters of the LGBT community, I happen to be a member of the LGBT community. So happy Pride Month to all of the community at large.
All right.
That was like the worst way.
This might be another topic we could delve into another day, maybe go a little bit deeper into the sense of self part.
I would love to.
I feel like we were out of time for today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, like every topic we do, let's go back into them again. Thank you very much, everybody. Like, click, subscribe, download, share on social media, argue with us if you want.
PP times, poo-poo times. Bye.
Bye.